Karin, what percentage of organizations would you guess, have what you call in the book a courageous culture?
Oh, that's really an interesting question. And I would say not the majority. I,
I think you might be understating it a
I'd
little.
say maybe 10%. But what
Okay.
I would say is we have find is that there are pockets,
Within organizations.
yeah, so maybe the entire organization isn't what we would define as a courageous culture, but there are people and managers creating what we would call a cultural oasis,
Hmm.
right? Doing the right things, really showing up, being very clear that they want people's ideas, getting curious and asking for those ideas and then responding well. And when you can find those little oases, people, they tend to get good results, right? And then it
Hmm.
spreads. So one of the things I would just want your listeners to know is even if you are not working in a courageous culture, you still can be building that within your team.
Right. It might not exist above you or around you, but it can exist on your team, whatever that might look like. So you started to get into it a little bit. Why don't you expound on it a little bit more and the definition of a courageous culture? What does that mean?
Yeah, so our favorite definition of culture in general, and I'm curious what yours is,
Hmm.
but is Seth Godin.
Hmm.
People like us do things like this. And we just love that because it's so simple. And so then when you say, okay, well, in a courageous culture, what do people like us do? People like us speak up. We share ideas. The default is to contribute. And we like to say silence isn't safe, but effort is everything in a culture like that.
Hmm. So what do you and there's a one of the last chapters, if not the last chapter in the book, is around diversity, diversified opinions, and so I love Seth's definition of culture as well. How do you respond? I'm interested in how you would respond to people who go, oh, really? People like us, so they look and think and like us.
It's how do we do things around here, right? What are our values? How do we show up? And so you can speak up, but you don't have to look the same. In fact, in a courageous culture, you need not only the traditional diversity, right, but also diversity of thought.
Right.
So, and that in a courageous culture, you are welcoming that. You're welcoming people to, you look to surround yourself with people who will challenge you and not be afraid to be a little bit vulnerable.
Right. Yeah, I think that's important to point out because some people hear that, especially in today's day and age, about
Yeah.
people like us. They think, "Whoa, wait, what do you mean by that?" And it's people like us who are willing to speak up or who are trying to achieve the results. There's lots that could mean.
Yeah.
Books don't. You don't sit down and write a book one day and it comes out the next day. And so, with your book coming out this year and the timing of it, what has happened in 2020? This is such a softball. What has happened in 2020 that you think, oh man, we couldn't have timed this topic better?
And it's interesting because that is the most frequently asked question.
Mm.
Sometimes people are like, how did you know? And the thing is, we got really curious about this topic because of work we were doing in organizations, and we were finding at the very senior level people really did want people's ideas and people to speak up. And then at the front line we were hearing things like, nothing ever happens anyway, nobody really wants to hear my thoughts. And we thought, are you working for the same company? So 3 years ago, when we
Mm.
started this journey, and then we began partnering on a really extensive research study with the University of North Colorado, that was what we were looking to solve. What, as it turns out, right now, ideas matter more than ever because everyone has been on some semblance of a pivot, right? To do the best they can with what they have from where they are, whether that's moving your entire workforce remote, or whether that is how do we bring in our healthcare workers and keep them safe in this environment? How do we manage the psychological issues and provide the support that we need and maintain productivity? Nobody wrote the book on how to lead in a pandemic, right? So you have two kinds of folks who are out there. You've got some leaders who are going out and say, I must have all the answers. I want to show up with confidence. I'm going to tell my team exactly what we need to do. Now imagine you have someone like that trying to solve for this crazy mess we're in, or you have someone who says, here's what I do know. I believe in this team. I have confidence that we can get through this. And you know what? I don't have all the answers. So here are the 3 strategic areas where we really need a good idea. I need everyone's best thinking on this. And I am willing to listen. I'm going to spend time to listen. Which leader is going to have the better solution?
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking about universities. My older son is, works in a university, and he's, it's interesting to see what is happening. Some of the universities are going out and saying, okay, these are the rules. This is how you're going to come back safely. And he said, guess what? Those are the ones that have already sent everybody back home. And the other ones are the ones who are saying, students, we need you to help us figure this out. How can we do this safely? What are you willing to do? And getting all those ideas. So I think that's just an example.
Yeah. Interesting. So there are lots of sentences, phrases, statements in the book that I highlighted. I read it, on the Kindle version, and so I'm highlighting different sentences. And one of them that I wanted you to elaborate on, because I just thought it was so good, is silence affects your bottom line. Talk more about that.
Because if you think about it, right now, and it continues to grow this way, the easy work is commoditized or automated. The work that if it's simple, if it's repetitive, you are seeing more examples of AI or computers doing that. You need your humans, which are more expensive than that, to be doing the work that only humans can do. And that's a couple of things. One is to show up with extreme empathy, both in how they're working with their customers and how they're working with one another, and being creative and coming up with new, unique solutions. So for example, you could have an AI system that says, okay, 37,000 people used an F word to describe our customer experience, right? And so you can tell that there's emotion, but a human reading those comments is going to say, so what do we need to do? Right? And so that's why it will impact your bottom line, because it'll impact your customer experience or your employee experience or productivity in a process. In our research, it was interesting because we said, okay, you've told us you're holding back ideas and why. What are the kind of ideas you're holding back? And they weren't trivial, right? They were about customer experience, productivity, things that would impact your bottom line.
So what causes, that's really interesting. You get into this in the book, so I want to ask you about it. If I've got silence on my team or in our organization, people are not making the decisions that I want them to, or man, I'm not getting the ideas. In fact, one of the statistics that I thought you all quoted that was interesting was a CEO survey that said 77% of CEOs say they struggle to find creativity and innovation they need. In other words, man, I need people to speak up, and I've got silence. What am I doing as a leader that may be causing that silence? Help me with that.
Well, one of the things is that people often, when we were doing the qualitative part of the research, executives would be frustrated, like, look, I have an open door. I've been very clear that I have an open door. And the problem with an open door is that for most people, it still takes courage to walk through it. And, all the research on psychological safety, Dr. Amy Edmondson, who wrote The Fearless Organization, also wrote the foreword to our book. He talks about how people tend to remember a negative experience in the past and glom onto that way more than a positive experience. And here's what we've noticed. So even if you are a fantastic leader, and I'm sure that the people listening to your podcast are attracted to your podcast because they are good leaders and they want to get it even better, even if you are someone like that, it is possible, and in fact likely, that the people on your team have had a negative experience in the past that they're holding on to. And just because you are leading well doesn't mean that that is still not preventing them from speaking up.
It might not
So
have been an experience I created, right, Karen? It might be the previous leader here or another company.
I will tell you, I'm positive that that is happening. And it's interesting because a lot of times as we were going in and said, okay, tell me about this negative experience that you had. Nothing ever happens, or there was a bully. Oh, yeah. Well, how long ago was that? Well, 10 years ago. Was it at this company? Well, no. Right? And that was consistent.
So that happened
Right?
over and over again in the research. That's
Yes.
so interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of those you all laid out these 5 reasons people don't speak up, right? Leadership doesn't want their ideas; they think that no one's asking me.
Yep.
That's kind of to your point of open door. Well, just because it's open doesn't mean you're actually inviting people to
Right.
come in. People lack the confidence to share ideas. They lack the skills. I thought that was interesting. Lack skills to share, and they don't think that anything is going to change. Why do it? I've raised my hand before, and nothing changed. I spoke up before, and nothing changed. And to your point, that might have happened at another company where I raised my hand, or 10 years ago. But I've had that experience, and so now why even bother offering innovative ideas?
Yeah.
Anything else, Karen, that before I ask you about something else, anything else that you think leaders should know to help address that and create a more robust conversation on their team?
Yeah. One of the really interesting things was that 50% said nothing will ever happen. And when you dig into this was the phenomena that we weren't really, we were a little surprised at. So, for example, we were working with a large financial institution, and they had a beautiful suggestion system. I mean, this thing was sexy. Like you could vote for, liking other people's ideas, incredible best practice. And we said, your employee engagement results must really be great. And they're like, yeah, no. We said, well, why? And they said, well, it's as it turns out in the suggestion system, most of the ideas that people are submitting are something that we're already doing. So we said, are you letting people know that this idea was so good that we're already doing it? Ooh, no. So what do you think those people were experiencing? They were thinking their idea was being ignored, right? And so that's what we call respond with regard. And that's when you get an idea, even if it's an idea you can't use, you want to respond with gratitude, making sure people understand how grateful you are that they are thinking about your business and speaking up. Then information, what is it that you are going to do or not do and why? And then an invitation to continue to contribute more.
I love that. It's closing the loop.
Yeah.
Asking for the feedback, and now you're closing that loop so that it encourages people to share more. Okay, a couple other areas I want to get you to add some color on that I read in the book that I thought were real interesting. The chapter on navigate your narrative. Talk about that for a minute. What's that concept? Why did you all put that in the book? What do you mean by that?
So important. In our 7-step process, we say it starts with you navigating your own narrative around courage, because you can see if you are afraid to speak up, if you are not sharing ideas, if you are letting your boss do something that you don't think is going to work, if you're not having the tough conversations with your peers, your team is watching you. And so you can be going and saying, yes, I really do want your best ideas. They're like, no, you don't, because you are afraid. It's not safe to do that here. And so we do a process in our Courageous Cultures programs called courage mapping. And we ask you to think about your various moments of courage throughout your career. And what were the values that were at play there? And that's for 2 reasons. One is we want to pull those positive experiences of speaking up front of mind, because you too may have negative ones that are pulling things down. And 2, a lot of times your moments of courage don't actually feel courageous at the time. It's just that you felt so strongly about something. It was so aligned with your values. You had no choice but to speak up. And we want to reinforce that what are those values that you are willing to fight for? Because those grounding yourself in those values will give you the courage that you need.
It's such a great point. I had, I think back to my own experience and leaders that I've worked for, I call them weather vanes. They walk into the room and which way is the wind blowing and they point that direction, right? So
Yeah.
and as a team, you're trying to give ideas to your leader. If you've demonstrated the courage to speak up, and then you're hoping that he or she will champion them, right? Push for them. And when they face opposition or pushback or debate around it, you hope that they'll represent it well, because they're the representative you're sending into a lot of those conversations that
Right.
you can't be in the room. Man, it's frustrated me so much. You raised such a great point on this, Karin, where it does affect your desire to speak up if you're watching your leader fold all the time. So now a follow-up to that hearing you say that made me think about, okay, so some of us are pretty courageous and we're pretty bold. We're wired that way, and we see what needs to change in an organization or on a team, or we have innovative ideas and we speak up a ton, and so we have a lot of courage, and yet we get punished for it. And sometimes we might come off abrasive, or we might not present those ideas in a way that causes people to respond well. Any coaching for people like that or who find themselves in that situation?
Yeah. That's a really important question, because we get this a lot. Like, somebody says, nobody ever listens to me, but then you watch how they're presenting things and they're overly emotional, or they're not bringing a lot of information, right? Or they're what we call an idea grenadier, and you're lobbing ideas at their boss and expecting their boss to implement them, right? So one of the things we do in our training is teach people how to vet and to present their idea in a way that it's more likely to be heard. And so we call this the idea model. So why is this idea interesting? And we don't mean just interesting, but why is it interesting to the strategic direction of where we're headed now?
Yeah, how's it going to impact results, right?
Yeah, teaching people to position it, not like, I need this for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is going to impact our customer experience because of this, or this will help our transition to work from home, right? But the why. Then D, is it doable? Like, how can you say this is something we could actually pull off right now, right? Because especially now, all these, we have a person on our team. She keeps coming to, I think you should shift the direction of your company to, and I'm feeling so bad because I don't want to shut down ideas, but I'm like, I don't need ideas about that right now. Like, we're pedaling as fast as we can.
It's such a massive idea or massive shift. You're like, whoa, we can't do that. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. So is it doable? Is this something we could actually pull off given all the things that we have going on right now? E, is it engaging? Who else might think it's a good idea and why? So this is teaching people to think about stakeholders. And then A, actions. What are a couple of key recommended next steps so that you've really thought it through? If you present an idea in that way to your boss, how are they going to say, oh, that's just terrible, right? They're going to be like, oh, this person is a critical thinker. They really care about the business. They want us to be successful. And they've actually thought this thing through.
I love that. So just state the words again. The
interesting, doable, engaging actions.
Awesome. I think quite a few people who are listening will be writing that down or wanting to remember that. Okay. Last thing I want to ask you about is this courageous culture cycle. I thought these two words were so interesting, how you all put them together in the book, clarity and curiosity. Talk about that. I found this really powerful.
So it's really an elegant dance between clarity and curiosity. So if you think about it, you want to be clear about two things. One, clear that the way we do things around here is we speak up. Clear, I really want your ideas. What we've also found is you need to be clear about what a good idea would accomplish. And this is really important. Rather than just going to your team and saying, what ideas do you have to make things better around here? That is intimidating, right? And like, oh, I don't know, where do I start, right? But if you say, right now, I need ideas about how we can stay productive without having, while people are working at home, without having people have the mental stresses that are weighing on them. So like, what can we do to help? All right, I might give us one idea. All right, so that's clarity where you want an idea. Curiosity is how do you then show up and deliberately ask for ideas? And the reason that we say that it's a dance is, you can be clear. Okay, we need ideas around improving our revenue. I'm curious. I'm not sure exactly how to do that. So we're going to ask ideas. But once you figure out and vet through, you've got maybe 6 ideas. One is the one you're really going to do. And everybody agrees that's the new strategic direction. Now you're back to clarity. Now you're not asking about a million other ideas. You're moving and let's implement this idea before we get curious again.
Yeah.
And you have some cultures. I think you have cultures that are very clarity folk cultures, which can get a lot of people in just tell me what to do. Or you have some that are so curious that they're never getting anything done because they're always coming up with ideas. And so it's really it's a toggle between those two.
And they're so powerful when they're put together, right? I think when so much of the inefficiency that I see in organizations is based on a lack of clarity, and so much of the lack of courage comes from an absence of curiosity.
Yeah.
And so when I, as a leader, make decisions or provide clarity to the team, these are the 3 most important things we need to be focused on and deliver in 2020 or 2021. And then I am curious about, well, how do you think we can do that? Or what do you think the way is? And then I love the process. I think this is so powerful. And so now I get those ideas, and then it's my job as a leader to now make a decision.
Yeah.
And okay, which one of those are we going to do? Right. And that's clarity. I just love that cycle, that dance, as you call it, back and forth. It's lacking in so many organizations, and I think you're dead on that some leaders are great at clarity and stink at curiosity, or vice versa. And that's really, really interesting. I stopped on those pages of the book and just thought about it for a little while because I thought it was so powerful. Karin, what have I not asked you about that you think is an important point around creating a courageous culture?
Well, as you get into this, one of the things that it's important to look at is what we call creating an infrastructure for courage. Because this is things like, how are you showing up in your onboarding process? Because most companies do the clarity thing really well in onboarding, right? This is the way we do things around here. Here are our policies. Sign this. Here's a message from our senior leader. This is our strategic direction for the next year. You're missing a huge opportunity if you really want to create a courageous culture from day one to say, hey, here's our clarity things. I'm also so curious. Tell me about how your last company did this. What are the best practices that you're bringing into the door? Because that does 2 things. One, it reinforces from the beginning that you really do want people's ideas and that you value them. And 2, oh my gosh, what competitive advantage do you have by seeing what your competitors are doing as they're coming in before they're ingrained on exactly how you do things around here? It's the same thing around rewards and recognition. If you are only recognizing people for, say you're only recognizing the person at the top of the stack rank, but you're not recognizing when somebody brings you a great new strategic idea and you just say, oh, thanks, and you don't put anything behind that, what are people going to be focused on? Just their position in the stack rank. Right. So you've got to be really clear that this is something that we value in every one of your HR systems.
Yeah. Awesome. There's so much more we could spend time on in the book. And one of the things I liked about the way that you all structured it is something that you as a leader can walk your team through. It's written that way to where you can experience this with your team. So the book is Courageous Cultures, How to Build Teams of Micro Innovators, which, by the way, I love that term, micro innovators, problem solvers, and customer advocates. Who wants any of those, right? like all of us. So great title, great timing. And Karin, thank you so much for taking the time to share some of the thoughts that are in the book with us.
Russ, thank you so much for having me.